Dutch van der Linde is the leader of his gang of outlaws in Red Dead Redemption 2. Dutch is a compelling and tragic character who goes through change unlike any character. In this video, I will take a look at Dutch's character arc starting from Red Dead Redemption 2 to 1. Starting off, Dutch is shown to have many great traits of a strong leader, that being Dutch is honest, positive, empathetic, responsible, and inspirational. Dutch also has many other great traits of a leader, but these are the main ones he shows the most. As a leader, Dutch makes sure to inspire those around him even during the most hopeless situations. Nowhere is this shown better at the beginning, where after a failed bank robbery heist, the gang has to go into hiding and must find shelter in a snowstorm. The gang has very little resources and have lost men. However, Dutch is there to lift everyone's spirit by saying that everything is going to be okay and that they've been through worse. There are many times where Dutch is able to inspire those around him. One where Dutch stands up to the Pinkertons when they threaten his ideas. The rest of the gang prepare their guns to show that they're standing behind Dutch and will protect themselves, essentially saying, if you mess with one of us, you're messing with all of us. Because much of the gang isn't as strong or critical on how to deal with bad situations, Dutch is always there to think of a plan to get them out. No matter how bad things get, Dutch remains positive and tries to inspire those around him. When it comes to Dutch being empathetic, Dutch shows this a lot whenever the gang does something bad. Two examples being John and Micah. Despite John leaving his gang of outlaws for a year, Dutch doesn't see John as completely selfish. Dutch sees John as just being the usual idiot he's always been. Since Dutch raised John as an orphan, he knows John better than anyone else. So Dutch uses his past knowledge with John to reason why he would act the way he is. Then there's the way Dutch views Micah. When Arthur refuses to help Micah out of jail due to past annoyances with Micah, Dutch criticizes Arthur.
And there's talk of hanging him.
Here's hoping. Arthur, what? The fool brought this on himself. You know my feelings about him, Dutch.
You think I can't see past his bluster to the heart inside? He is a fine man.
No, I ain't saving that fool.
I can't go. My face will be all over West Elizabeth. I am asking. He would do it for you.
Dutch views his gang just like any flawed family. Good people, but not perfect. Dutch is able to insert himself in even the worst people's shoes and still have faith in them to do the right thing. Dutch doesn't see people for what they are, but why they are. However, that's not to say Dutch sees the good in everyone. In particular, Colm O'Driscoll Dutch hates due to the fact that he killed Dutch's lover, Annabelle. But Dutch is blind to the fact that Colm only killed Annabelle because Dutch killed Colm's brother. The reason why Colm is rivals with Dutch in the first place completely flew over his head. But Dutch does try to reason with Colm when Pearson tells Dutch about a possible peace offering between the two. Even though Dutch knew it was a trap, he still tries to get the right words under his hesitating breath. Then there is Dutch's honesty and responsibility. As a leader, it's important to be responsible and honest about your intentions so no one thinks you're up to no good. This is something Dutch values and is his main reason for why he dislikes the government. Dutch dislikes the government because despite the fact that they're meant to protect people from dangerous criminals obsessed with greed and power, the government is just as greedy and power hungry but tries to hide it. For example, in Red Dead Redemption, the government takes John's family in order to make John find 3 of his old gang members. However, it's unfair for the government to force John's sins against his own family. Despite the fact the government says it's to redeem John, it's really to use John to gain their profit faster, and they end up killing John in the end regardless. Dutch doesn't respect the Pinkertons mainly because they are snakes or wolves in sheep's clothing. Dutch believes the Pinkertons and government have lost sight of what they are originally fighting for, especially when he says this.
This place ain't no such thing as civilized. It's man. So in love with greed, he has forgotten himself and found only appetites.
This idea Dutch shares is quite common when people rise to power. EA, for instance, is a video game company that used to make really good games, but when they learned the amount of profit they could gain from selling games was a lot, they focused more on what money they got from selling games and not why people bought them. People often lose sight of themselves the higher they get and don't want to admit that they could fall. But isn't Dutch the same if his gang are constantly lying and robbing people? Not exactly. While Dutch and his gang rob people, money and power isn't their focus. Instead, they steal from those with too much power, such as corrupt businessmen like Leviticus Cornwall, to give to those who have very little, very much like Robin Hood. So what may seem bad can actually be good. This is an aspect of Dutch I've noticed, is that he favors the idea of bad people turning good, than good people hiding the fact that they're bad. Dutch tries to keep his word and not lie to those around him. An example being when Arthur worries that Dutch is going against his word about revenge being a luxury they can't afford, when it seems like Dutch is going after Colm. However, instead of shooting Colm, Dutch stands by his word and doesn't shoot Colm when he had the chance. Dutch more focuses on the plan to get enough money so everyone can escape. The gang is inspired to follow Dutch because of why he fights. So it seems as though Dutch is the perfect leader to follow, right? Well, remember when I said Dutch was against those who had lost sight of what they were fighting for and focused on the wrong thing? Tragically, this happens to Dutch. Or it was happening to Dutch all this time, but as Dutch became more vulnerable, it revealed itself. While Dutch is honest, positive, empathetic, responsible, and inspirational, all of these traits are countered by one that soon revealed itself, that being ego. This aspect of Dutch is what crumbles his character. Throughout the story, Dutch is doing humble and kind things out of respect for his family, helping John save his son, giving those around him inspiration, and doing all he can to make sure everyone survives. However, Dutch wasn't doing good things because he cared about others, but did them so others would care about him. This brings up the theme of, you shouldn't do good deeds because they will get you noticed, but because it is the right thing to do. Throughout the story, it seemed as though Dutch was doing good things because he cared about others, but he was actually doing good deeds so he could benefit his ego. But did Dutch actually care about people from the start, or did the pressure of being a leader change him for the worse? Hard to say. But then again, people do show their true colors when conflict increases. Not to mention, every mistake Dutch makes, he refuses to admit his wrongs. Even at the start of the story, when Dutch decides to rob Leviticus Cornwall, this causes Cornwall to hire the Pinkertons, even though Hosea reminded Dutch that their focus was to stay low, which results in greater consequences later on. Because Dutch excuses his flaws, he loses sight of the damage he's done and tries to sweep it under the rug. Nowhere is this shown better than when Dutch gets revenge on Angelo Bronte. Although Angelo Bronte took John's son Jack, Dutch was able to reason with him to get Jack back. Dutch even made good friends with Bronte and was invited to his party. But after Bronte betrays Dutch by setting him up to be captured, Dutch gets revenge on Bronte by brutally drowning him. While Bronte is to be blamed for being a jerk, Dutch fell into Bronte's trap and doesn't want to admit it. It's like blaming a scammer for getting scammed by one, or a scammer blaming a scammer for being scammed by a scammer. By Dutch drowning Bronte, not only does he go against his word about revenge, but it draws more bad attention, which causes them to lose Hosea and Lenny to the Pinkertons during a bank robbery the next day. Even though Dutch said killing Bronte was to get the law off them, it only brought more heat. In reality, Dutch's true traits are dishonesty, unempathetic, irresponsible, and narcissistic. These traits hurt Dutch's leadership. While leaders are supposed to remain strong, that's not to say being stubborn to your shortcomings makes you strong. Having humility and admitting that you're wrong is what makes you a strong leader. Strong leaders know when to set aside their ego and personal interests in doing the right thing. One of the saddest parts of Dutch to come out once his true nature is shown is how Dutch secretly betrays John and Arthur. Because John and Arthur question and doubt Dutch the most, Dutch believes that they're traitors. But the thing is that John and Arthur aren't against Dutch, but more against his ideas. It's never their intention to attack Dutch as a person. The gang try their best to stand behind Dutch because they do want to see him become better. However, Dutch is so blind to his gang's feelings, he's unable to put himself in their shoes that he simply labels them as cowards who's lost their spine. But despite Dutch's criticism, he also doesn't want to lose his gang because he needs someone to complement his ego. However, his excuses don't stop Arthur or John from doubting him, so whenever they're in trouble, Dutch chooses not to help them and excuses his selfish reasoning not to. It gets to a point where it seems like Dutch is keeping everyone hostage, and no one can stop or question him because as a leader, he has all the power. Instead of being a leader to inspire others by using his power, he's now using his power to only inspire himself. Often bad people will hide the bad things they do by covering up, but sometimes all a bad person needs is an audience to keep up the act that they're good. Just because someone is popular doesn't mean they're a good person. This is why Dutch favors Micah the most out of his gang. No matter how bad things got for everyone because of Dutch's stubborn decisions, Micah was always supporting him. But in reality, Micah was only using Dutch for his own personal gain, like how Dutch is using his gang for his ego. This results in Dutch's worst mistake in trusting Micah in favor of Arthur. Despite Arthur claiming that Micah was only using Dutch, Dutch doesn't want to admit that he's being used. Dutch must choose between Arthur or Micah. If he agrees with Arthur, he admits his wrongs. If he agrees with Micah, he admits that he can do no wrong. However, Dutch ends up not taking any side because he can't find a way to justify his actions without feeling hurt. So years later, John confronts Micah and Dutch is put in the same position again. Dutch tries to justify his actions, but admits that he doesn't have much to say anymore. So he shoots Micah to cover his tracks and leaves without saying anything to John. Dutch hasn't admitted to all his wrongs, but he seems to be getting there.
Thank you.
Years later, Dutch is still trying to fight the government, this time using Native Americans. However, despite the years of reflection, Dutch still doesn't admit to all his wrongs and in leaving John to die. That is until John corners Dutch on a mountain. Instead of giving a fake speech about change as a distraction to avoid consequences in Red Dead Redemption 2, Dutch is genuine this time. Dutch finally reflects upon his actions and admits that what he was striving for was a waste. Not only does Dutch admit to his consequences, but he ends his life knowing that he died for nothing. Dutch's story is incredibly tragic. Despite his evil actions, to some extent, it can be understandable as to why Dutch is acting the way he is. It's not easy for anyone to admit their flaws, especially when they feel passionately that what they're doing is the right thing. Sometimes you want to stand up against the world's problems. Sometimes you are the world's problems, but don't realize it. Dutch represents the opposite of redemption in a way. A man so determined to run away from his crimes by covering them up with false justifications that he ended up dying for nothing. But he did teach John a valuable lesson about what happens to those who lose sight of themselves.
Our time has passed, John.
In the Red Dead Redemption series, Dutch van der Linde is the tragic leader of his gang of outlaws, a man so consumed of ego that it ended up consuming him in the end. And in the end, that is how Dutch van der Linde lost everything.